Anthony, Owen, Kristen, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves in a moment. But first, I want to welcome you back to Montclair Kimberly Academy. You likely remember a slightly different school than the one that we are today. But there are two things, I was thinking about this, there are two things that have not changed and that will drive today's program. So first, when we call people together into MKA spaces, we expect that what happens in those spaces and with those people will have a positive impact on the world. So we expect those people to be transformed in some way, and then for them to go on into the world and be change agents and leaders. And second, as we learn, we always seek to innovate and improve. So today's podcast really tries to reflect both of those timeless principles. We've brought you together because we expect that this conversation will provide some growth possibly for its participants and for its listeners, and have a positive impact on the world. And we're also trying to push ourselves to communicate in what for us is a new podcast format. So let's begin. I was hoping we could start, and we'll just go Anthony, Owen, and then Kristen, having you introduce yourself to the room. But also, as you introduce yourself, if you could frame a problem in your field that you feel is attracting the most attention and resources currently. So, Anthony, if you could begin.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I'm Anthony Bryden. I am class of 1990. I guess 3 points. I would fashion myself first non-professionally as a cyclist. Left MKA and actually biked to school up to New Haven and Yale when I went to college. And then after college, biked out here to Silicon Valley in San Francisco, where I live now, and have worked in tech since. I've done substantial work on the nonprofit side with Habitat for Humanity, and more recently with Universal Basic Income, which is a cause that I am excited about and spend a lot of time on. But my professional life has been in Silicon Valley and in tech. I have co-founded and led 4 companies with the same set of co-founders. We are currently working in artificial intelligence. I work closely with a fund out here called AI Fund, which is run by Andrew Ng, and am really focused on the area right now of AI and creativity, and what AI can do to push new creative technology inventions into the world. That's the core problem that we're focused on, and deep investments in artificial intelligence on both the startup and the venture side.
So I just want to clarify. So the core problem, can you just drill into that just a little bit? Because I was obviously listening closely, and I just want to make sure that we understand where you're spending most of your time right now.
Artificial intelligence right now is doing a lot of mundane tasks and rote tasks and kind of routine tasks. There's been relatively little investment in kind of pushing the boundary of innovation and invention. There's some areas where new proteins are being discovered, in kind of biotech and the like. I'm focused on applications of artificial intelligence to invention in technology circles, actually creating new products, new features, entirely new companies that are driven by AI.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Owen, you're up next.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for inviting us on the podcast. I'm Owen Jennings. I was the class of 2007 at MKA. I went to Dartmouth College and majored in philosophy. I started my career at Bridgewater Associates, which is the largest hedge fund in the world. I did that for a few years, and then I joined Square, which is now called Block. I led business operations for Square for a few years before the IPO. I'm currently the chief operating officer of Cash App, which is one of the other business units within Block. You can think of Cash App as a peer-to-peer money services business and a digital bank. Some of you in the New Jersey, New York area might be more familiar with Venmo. It's in a similar sort of space. I've been at Cash for about 7 years now. The key problem that I'm focused on and that I've spent basically the past 10 years focused on is economic empowerment and I know that's kind of a buzzword, but by that, I really just mean like, how do we help folks better participate in, contribute to, and benefit from the global economy? So how do we help folks transact better, whether that's spending money, saving money, investing money, borrowing money? And I think it's one of the, the 3 or 4 massive problems when I think about what's facing, I think, really like the global population. And I think many of us who are probably listening to this podcast don't necessarily feel some of the pain that the vast majority of those in the world do. But that's how I spend my time. And that's probably the biggest problem that's driving most of my work.
Kristen, you're up.
Hi, I'm Kristen Connolly. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for having me on. I'm class of 1998. I started doing theater at MKA, and then I continued doing that at Middlebury College and eventually went on to the Yale School of Drama. I'm an actress. I guess I should have said that to start. But I have been working professionally for about 16 years since I finished grad school. And, my sort of goal starting out was to do Shakespeare in the Park. That was kind of my dream. And I did get to do that and some other stage experience, but I've also gotten to do a lot of work in TV and film. And that's kind of where I've spent the bulk, I would say, of my career. Thinking about the biggest, I think, or the issue attracting probably the most attention right now in our field. I'm sure most people who are listening to this probably know that we have had kind of a tumultuous year in the entertainment industry. We've had 2 major strikes, the WGA, the Writers Guild, and the Screen Actors Guild, which led to 7 months of work shutdown. And the kind of big sticking point in a lot of these contracts, both of them have now resolved, just the actors in the past couple of weeks. But AI, artificial intelligence, has been a major source of, I would say, anxiety for a lot of performers and artists. I think the main fear is that acting and filmmaking are kind of becoming the coal industry of 2023, where if producers can use a simulation or a digital replica of a performer, it's much cheaper and easier for them to use that replica than to use a living, breathing human being. And I think that a lot of actors are afraid that their career is sort of disappearing before their eyes. So I'm actually really interested to hear what you guys think about that. I listened to a podcast recently with Justine Bateman and Alec Baldwin, and they were talking about how a digital replica isn't going to lock herself in her trailer because she broke up with her boyfriend and, not going to get into a fight with the director or, show up drunk or anything like that. So not that I've done any of those things, but anyway, that's where I guess I'll leave it.
Yeah, no, that's... we're in an interesting place right now, I guess, in this conversation. I feel like we should start with just by trying to kind of understand each other, ask some questions, and see if we can maybe tease out some commonalities in the problems that the 3 of you are staring at and looking to solve. So this is where we get to practice our sort of listening and synthesis skills. What did we hear that was common? What did we hear that was different? Do we have any questions for each other?
I was going to say, it's funny because I think we're all talking about the same thing. Steve's talking about economic empowerment. Kristen is talking about, job security, which translates to economic empowerment. I talked about the twofold of AI and upside in terms of creativity. That's a threat to what Kristen is describing in some ways. And the work in UBI, which is universal basic income, which is the need to supplement, what could be pretty substantial reshuffling of the economy. So it's very funny to hear, 3 folks, 3 different parts of the world, all working on different angles of the same issue.
I agree. I was gonna draw the line. I think when you think about UBI and kind of like the liquidity smoothing for a given individual, as there are like shifts in the job marketplace, and how that might evolve in the coming decades? I would actually love to hear more about your work in that area. I've read about a few experiments in specific geographies, but that's pretty interesting when you think about the 7-month or 8-month strike on the actors and writers side of things, and what some sort of like government assistance or some sort of private assistance could have provided. And it's connected to me for Cash App because we have we have lending products and borrow products both for consumers as well as small businesses who include creators and artists, and that's like a critical part of a given individual's life is how do I get from paycheck to paycheck? How do I smooth over my liquidity and make sure that I can make ends meet? And so there's some nugget in there in terms of how we're helping creators and inventors and artists be successful, even in a world where these large language models and AI are increasingly becoming relevant. We don't want to lose the I guess like the human part of what makes all of us who we are and how we're kind of operating in the world and in the economy.
I should also say that it wasn't just like the writers and actors strike, of course, I think this goes without saying, but when you have these major unions that are shut down, it's not just us that aren't working, but it's all of these, it's all of the crew people and all of the hair and makeup and the Teamsters that are driving the vans, and it's it's editors, it's everyone. And it really sort of drew a line between the people who can ride out a strike like that and the people who can't. People who do background work are not making the kind of money, obviously, that someone like George Clooney is making. And I think that kind of career security was really brought into sharp focus. I should also say, I think that there are a lot of really positive things that AI could potentially do for the industry. They're just one thing, they use this terrible smoke on almost everything you shoot, and it's not a healthy thing to be breathing in. But if they could add that, in post, I think it would be like a game changer in terms of just people's health. So, I think we're all just in this sort of uncharted territory. And for some people, it's, it seems like this is a tool that can be used for good. And for other people, it looks like just this tidal wave coming that'll wash them all away.
Anthony, how do you, how would you talk about creativity, to a group of actors, let's say, who are out of work because of a technology, if we get to that point?
Well, when I try to apply it to entertainment, I think mostly first and foremost of the script writing and the screenwriting, and that component of it. It is fascinating how creative and innovative language models can be if you push them a certain way. And the large language models, we're all familiar with the chat GPTs and that have cropped up that are folks are using. It's really interesting to when you see just creative ideation that can come from a language model when pushed and prodded a certain way. It pulls into relief how constrained sometimes our thinking is, and how the plaudits that we give to the very small number of people that we think of as truly creative, they're able to come up with 5 ideas, 10 ideas, 15 ideas. A language model put in the right person's hands can come up with 200, 500, 600 ideas that can be whittled down very quickly. But I'm watching it, work in tandem with people that wouldn't have necessarily considered themselves creative to come out with some very creative outputs. And in an organization, sometimes in a product team or a marketing team or something like that, 1 or 2 people will be known as the creative ones, and other folks will be, have more kind of functional tasks. So it's really interesting to watch. We think a lot about the development of AI and the language models getting more and more sophisticated. But it's really also interesting to think about the constraints that our thinking has had. Steve, that's a little bit it's a little bit of a roundabout answer, and I lost complete focus on what you were going for. That's some of the things that have fascinated me on that front. My a question I had for Kristen: how vulnerable do you think the folks who are in front of the camera are? At this point, I think it was amazing, like leveraging the power that the industry has right now and the folks in front of the camera have right now at this moment in time to get some of the concessions. I think that's a wonderful thing and not a moment too late. How vulnerable do you think folks are?
I think, not clearly not being an expert in this is all kind of, I think we've all been sort of learning on the fly since this issue came up. I think, like, at this moment in time, I would say the most vulnerable people are probably background performers. We've seen these movies for for the last several years where there's like a crowd at a football stadium or ancient Rome or whatever, and it's like those people aren't all really there, and they're being filled in. We're all sort of accustomed to seeing VFX, and so I would imagine that is where it would, if you're replicating background performers, that would probably be number one. And the other thing that I think we're seeing, another vulnerable group is, people who've already died. I saw something just last week where it was like, it's a new Jimmy Stewart movie coming out, which is like, on the one hand, like amazing. It's innovative and it's an incredible thing. But on the other hand, I think it is a little bit alarming to creative people that not only is the work that you've already done sort of in play, but that might continue after you've died. And so some of the things that I've heard, and I don't know like what kind of capability there is actually for all of this at this point, but things like even just like that your hair and makeup wouldn't have to be done. You could just come in to work and show up and start shooting, and then that would all be done in post. And I don't think they could do that today, but it certainly seems like within the realm of possibility in the next few years. So like things like that, even though it's an amazing, it would save an enormous amount of time and money, I'm sure, for production. It changes your performance. It changes, when you put on a wig, say, or makeup and a costume, or even like, so I was working on something recently where I was shot and killed, and they didn't have any gunshot wounds. They didn't have anything. They're adding all of that later on. And, on the one hand, I'm glad that we didn't have to take the time to do all of that stuff because, it adds a lot of time to the day. On the other hand, like when you're performing, having all of those pieces makes a difference, and, it affects your performance. So that's just a piece of it. But I also think like, the other thing is that say a movie star, say it's like Natalie Portman has a digital replica. She can do 4 movies at a time with that. Whereas like maybe those roles would go to somebody else, or, probably not me, obviously, but, somebody who maybe is like an up and comer or just somebody else. And I think what people, especially sort of in the, like, I would say like mid-tier of actors that are working actors, but not household names are talking about and are worried about is that they're going to be the ones mostly that get squeezed out. Like nobody's worried about Bradley Cooper. Like he's going to be fine. But I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry, I do think it's interesting. Obviously, who knows how things will unfold? I think it's hard for all of us to sit here and try to predict the future. But obviously, recognizing that there's potentially an evolution that's going to affect the livelihood of hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and that's a real thing. In terms of the positive side, I think there is, and this touches on what Anthony was saying, just around how we can leverage LLMs and AI for creativity. I think if I think to like a corollary, and we think about like we pick any kind of paradigm shift, when you think about the agricultural revolution, the onset of like tractors didn't mean that like every farmer was out of a job. It actually made farmers like 10x more productive. And I'm sure that wasn't evenly spread. And so from a positive framing globally, outside of like the Hollywood market in the United States, like we also could see just a proliferation of content that's like unimaginable. We could have 10x, 100x, 1000x the amount of like incredible content, giving everyone, like one 14-year-old in Africa, the ability to produce a 2-hour movie and distribute it to hundreds of millions or billions of people. And so it is hard to think through how these paradigm shifts flow through. And not to really like form any perspective, but I think there's an equal amount of like potentially devastating and really hard things to work through, as well as a tremendous amount of opportunity that we might see as this flows through the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And as I was hearing, Kristen, I really appreciate your framing because, we're talking about one industry, but there are analogies to many other industries. Like if what we're getting at here, if we connect Owen's comment and your comment, like, yes, we might be unleashing this incredible creativity, but if we leave behind, this entire sort of, let's call it this like middle block of workers, of creatives, we have to figure out how to move those folks into sort of some type of productive process, right? Like that there's got to be analogies in other industries for that. Where like if we just keep the top talent, like all the people who are serving that, what are they supposed to do? So I'd like to sort of move that into that territory a little bit. So like out of Hollywood and into other industries, like what are we supposed to do with that group of people who are going to need to be upskilled or, brought forward in some way? And this touches on, I guess, Owen's work, Anthony's work. So we can go in any direction.
I think I don't have a solution, but obviously, but I think the place that we're seeing this the most in like the consumer tech industry is on the customer support side. So I think like 3 years ago, like a typical, if you look at like a Google or an Amazon, you would have like a BPO, like an outsourced kind of scalable sales and support model. And you might have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of individuals who are answering the phone or chatting with customers to provide service. The entire world shifted when folks saw the power of ChatGPT. And I think it's like pretty obvious that we're going to start seeing like way, way more automated customer service. And that flows through to, I think, millions and millions of individuals who are playing that role. I think it's probably unfair to say like, well, you used to talk to a given individual in chat. Now, like, can you just work on like the underlying data structure and systems? And like, can you build a technology stack that's going to serve them? I don't know if that's a reasonable transition that these individuals are going to be able to make. And that's what I think is the interesting connecting point to Anthony's point on UBI, which is like, again, who knows what's going to happen? I'm pretty optimistic that we're not necessarily going to be out of work and out of meaningful things to do. But to the extent that in a given sector or in a given part of the world, there is just a gap versus what you've spent the past 20 years doing and what the world looks like now. How do we make sure that those individuals can still take care of their families? They can still put food on the table. They can still live great lives. And maybe it's a little bit. I'm probably painting a more dire picture than it actually is, but I think we're in it right now. Like we're starting to see this flow through right now on the tech side.
If I had to think about the problem to solve, if everything is going to change structurally, which I think it is, we're at least some consensus on this call that we're not sure how it's going to change structurally, but it is going to change, significantly structurally. The question becomes, this is for a graduating MKA student. This is for us. This is for everybody. Like, how do the individuals and organizations and societies adapt a lot more quicker? Because the rate of change of what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years, will arguably be equivalent to the prior 100. That I think, one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of universal basic income, just in general, is its flexibility and its fluidity. Universal basic income, the basic premise is that instead of routing government dollars through programs, which are relatively fixed, they have missions, they're relatively rigid, and there's a high amount of loss, going into a job reskilling program that then tries to recruit folks, that tries to run classes. Just give the money directly to the beneficiaries and let them make choices about how to reskill themselves or the like. One of the there are proponents of it, there are detractors of it, but it is undeniably agile. Folks can change the use of that income in a minute, according to a changed set of needs in a way that government programs would take 5-10 years to adapt to. So I think it's the agility. My personal anecdote, I just started a week ago brushing my teeth with my left hand after, decades of brushing my teeth with the right hand. And it's just a fun argument hack for neuroplasticity. You do something in a slightly different motion, your brain frees up for an hour to try and becomes, more adaptive to learning. So that's the most trivial example of how are individuals, organizations, how are we going to be able to adapt, in the next 20 years while seismic upheaval occurs.
And Owen, you can take care of all that universal basic income, right? You're building the plumbing for that.
Yeah. We facilitated the stimulus checks during COVID with the IRS and the Bureau of Treasury. I do think the distribution mechanism is actually fairly interesting. I guess I tend to agree. I mean, maybe if we posit that there's going to be like a massive structural shift in the labor markets as AI continues to kind of like uproot how things have worked over the past like 10 to 30 years. And then the question is, how are governments across the world supporting individuals through that change to make sure they can continue to participate in the economy in a reasonable way? I think that's like a pretty useful problem to try to think through that like touches on my world, Kristen's world, and Anthony's world.
Perfect. You brought us to the crux. I appreciate it. So let's dive into that problem a little bit if we can. And at this point, again, according to the governing structure of this conversation, we were going to see if we could figure out like what would a solution look like, whether that would be some kind of organization we would build, a company, a nonprofit, piece of software. And, obviously there's probably things out there already that exist, so we can point to some of those things if we can think of them. But we can also see if we can come up with something brand new.
I guess one question for you, Anthony, I think you're like the UBI expert. In your perspective, like does UBI always have to be facilitated by the public sector? Is there a world where the private sector could play that sort of role? Or do you start getting to sums of money that are that like don't end up tying out?
The most prominent UBI organization right now is probably Give Directly. And 3 academics and economists, 15 years ago founded it. And it's probably funneled north of $1 billion now, largely into Kenya and other places in Africa. It's predominantly privately funded, but in many ways it's philanthropists, it's donors, it's a little bit of public funding during COVID. I see it principally as a blueprint, a private blueprint for what could become, more substantial public distributions. They're building, Owen, to your Cash App point, they're building the infrastructure, they're building the model, they're showcasing the success stories. But I think it probably has to be public, publicly funded, just because the scale of the investment. It's trillions of dollars that we're talking about, to support and to reskill and do those types of things. Now, I think there's an interesting, one of the angles that I'm interested in is, there was a time where the corporate tax rates were quite high, and the individual tax rates were quite low. We're at the opposite right now, where the corporate tax are, not really contributing. A lot of the gains of this technology and the gains of AI are going to accrue to corporations and shareholders, and I think there's a strong argument at that point for much higher corporate contribution. But so that's kind of a half answer, right? It's that is going to be private industry funding, through government. That would be government regulated taxes, into those UBI programs.
That makes sense, especially given that, like, I think one of the kind of like canonical things, like, all right, now a given engineer who's using Copilot, which is like an AI tool for writing code, can be 10 times or 100 times more effective than before. So in order to produce the same like unit of value, if you're a Google or an Amazon or whatever, you might need, 10% or 1% the number of engineers. So you're going to have massively growing profits, presumably in our unknown fake future, over the next 20 years that could potentially be accruing to way fewer people. And so the ability to like increase taxes for some of these companies that are developing the technology and then reallocate and redistribute those funds to those who are otherwise in careers that are being affected to the downside by some of the changes we're talking about could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it seems obvious. It would require a lot of. But if the last 20 or 50 years have been, the shift of that economic from kind of labor to capital, and we've heard that, and capital to shareholders, it seems obvious to start shifting it back through those type of mechanisms. But I guess a lot of political will would be required there.
So I want to try to bring this conversation back down to earth a little bit. If we wanted to get started, soon, and maybe we need to try to restate the problem a little bit more sharply. So, Owen, can you tell us what we're working on right now?
Yeah, I think we're trying to figure out a model, whether it's privately funded or publicly funded, where, given what we believe might happen in the future, which is like there will be shifts in the job marketplace, and in order to like continue working and earning an income as many folks have over the past 100 years, there's going to be a required up-leveling of skills or shift in skills and abilities. And to the extent that we don't think there's going to be a perfect, very, very fast way to do that across the entire world, what we're trying to make sure is that there's not hundreds of millions or billions of folks who are out of a job and not earning income. And so one way you could approach that is some sort of UBI concept. One way you could approach that is a massive training program to try to provide individuals with the skills and abilities they need to work in the economy of 2030 or 2040. I think that's the question on the table. And then maybe one prompt to try to make it more digestible is like, I think starting small, like to give directly example is great, but I think starting small makes a lot of sense. And so we would want to prove this model in a pretty small scale before we start thinking about, tens of trillions of dollars. And so like, is there a particular company, a particular market, a particular zip code where we could develop a model that we think would be able to scale is perhaps like a prompt that we could think through.
And scale on the reskilling part? Is that what you scale on the, what component?
I just think it's harder to, we have 30 minutes. Let's see. I think it's harder to talk about how are we going to get every government in the world to give every person in the world $1,500 a month versus like, okay, we think that, I don't know, I'm making something up. We think that Google, or let's go back to the entertainment example. We think that, I don't know anything about the entertainment world, but we think that there's a given producer or agency that is going to make changes in the next 5 years where 50% of the current employees are no longer going to be employed. What structure can we put in place for that? You're Kristen, you're going to have to help me, but that agency, producer, whatever, such that they can do the work of shifting their current and near-term profits into a benefit for those individuals who are going to be affected by the changes in AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what's really tricky about it. I mean, I think part of this past year, there's been, because of the back and forth between the creatives and the producers, to put it like crudely, is this sort of expectation that the producers, all they care about is money. It's the bottom line and that's it. And I think, on some level that's true, but a lot of producers really care about making art. Like, of course they want to make money too, but they also want to make art. Like they want to make films, or they want to make a show that's really good. They're not just making it to like churn it out. And I think that this sort of the streamers have changed a lot of things. And one of the things that could be coming down the road is, say, we'll get a new season of Friends, or and we don't need them all to participate because we already have them, and we can just make that and put it out again. But I guess I think like the UBI idea is a great idea, and I think in the short term it would really help people a lot. But it still brings us back to the same problem, like I was saying about the producers. But people, yes, they want to make money, but they want to, like, most people get into the arts and entertainment industry because they want to make something creative that's artistic and that is sort of like reaches other people and connects us all on a human level. So the UBI sort of takes care of that part of it, but I don't know if it takes care of the artistry. Although, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I've heard that generative AI, I've heard it compared to a blender, where it can't make you a smoothie by itself, but when you put all of this input, it can draw from all of that and make something new. But it doesn't, that input is a human work, it's someone's work. So, I don't know where that, I guess what I'm saying is, like, hopefully there's still room for human artists.
My take on this is kind of like the technology and art thing. Pretty naive perspective, but there was a similar sort of paradigm shift when like the camera became a thing, and there's this oh my gosh, you could look at these kind of like pessimistic articles over the past 200 300 years, like, oh my god, we used to paint and it was like so labor intensive and it was so like core to who we are as humans. Now you can just take a picture. Like, that's not art. Like, ban cameras, we hate cameras, whatever. And then now obviously like photography is like a beautiful digital art that everyone, I think everyone would by and large agree with that. I see similar things. Like, I've seen incredible things from Midjourney, from DALL-E, or what have you. And so the tool set is changing. I think that humans will forever be able to like, creatively express themselves. I'm optimistic on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from when I was in high school, there have been all these conversations about theater where, like, is it dying? We have all this other stuff we can watch, especially during COVID. It was, is this it finally for theater? And it's still just limping along somehow. And I think there is like there's something about that people want, that connection. They want that immediacy. And I think especially in a world, even when you just call Delta Airlines or something, and it's like, can I please get an actual human being on the phone? And I think everybody, speak to an agent.
Yeah.
Well, the answer to that, Kristen, is no. No, you may not.
And you're not getting your bag back either.
One question that I have, if I try to posit something. Okay, so in SF, there was like some sort of employee mandate thing. I forget exactly how it works, but essentially, small businesses were required to pay their employees like a reasonable living wage. I forget what, let's say it's $20 an hour, $25 an hour. And that would be like marketed. That would be like put on the menu, put on the receipt. It was kind of a known thing. I think it impacted maybe, tip expectations or what have you. And it was like a positive thing that I think consumers reacted to. I'm wondering if there's some analog here. If we're trying to shift like some of the, and by the way, this is all, I think, anyway, getting into taxation and all of our points of view. But anyway, hypothetically, if we were trying to shift some of the gross profit from one of these producers or agencies in Hollywood back toward the existing employee base now, could we create some sort of company or foundation that like labels, like producer A is a GiveWell producer, and they take care of their employees. They take care of everyone, all their contractors, everyone who works for them. Producer B is not. And could that become something that like socially actually matters to consumers and viewers, such that like when you're on Netflix, there's actually a category that's like the give well, or whatever, it's a stupid name, but whatever, the give well category, and folks are actually choosing to engage more with that. And when you get that designation, you do have to commit 10% of your gross profit or whatever, 10% of your revenue back to your existing employee base now to make sure that they're going to be okay as we up level over the next 10 years. I guess, like, would that be digestible? Why is that stupid? Is there any model like that kind of exists?
So no, I think that's a great idea. I think that, especially, now with, it sounds so stupid to be like with the internet, but, people can look up where things that they're spending their time and their money on, where they're coming from. And I think people do, not everybody, but a lot of people do care about that stuff. Consumers, like I know I do, in terms of things that, I don't know that. I wonder how you do it with, like, say, a Netflix or something, but there is this company A24 that makes films. They were able to shoot during the writer's strike, during the actor's strike, because they were complying basically with the kind of with the union's ask, basically, and they were, it was considered to be like an ethical or production, and so and people used it as an example of, like, see, it's not really that hard, like, especially for an independent film company to do these things. But, and that's going way beyond like AI. That's all kinds of other asks that the union had. But I think something like that could be really, really interesting and would certainly appeal to actors. And probably everybody, like crews, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, and I think there's a lot of strong analogs for that. You kind of laughingly threw out the name GiveWell. It's a great name. There's a GiveWell in the philanthropic space rates the effectiveness of different philanthropies. So the essentially the percentage of dollars that are donated to the philanthropy that make it through the recipients. Give directly does really well. I think over 90%, 95% of what you give directly makes it into the pockets, of one of the folks. But, you always hear about philanthropy where very little that is contributed makes it through to the end recipients. And GiveWell matters. Folks steer their philanthropic dollars to things that are ranked high, in GiveWell. And in the corporate space, there's a lot of political tussling right now over the ESG movement and, the financial space, and like our companies environmentally and socially responsible. But that's mattering a lot. These large pension funds and huge investors are trying to steer their dollars, or increasingly pressured to steer their dollars to companies that have high ratings on the ESG front. So I think what you're talking about, there's a lot of is a good idea. There's a lot of precedence for branding that, and folks making decisions on it.
I think one interesting thing for is that on the, not to go into a rabbit hole, on the ESG front, I think it's like who is ordaining these sorts of like labels. I think one of the benefits that we're talking about here is a private company, and I think if we're a private company, we can over-index on transparency. Say, like, here's the framework, here are the heuristics, here's the algorithm for how we are assessing whether somebody is getting a given company, whether it's a producer in Hollywood or it's a company in Silicon Valley, whatever, is getting this label. And if we had, let's change from GiveWell to like intentional creativity. So any company can get like an intentional creativity badge, and we can start really small with like doing it with 5 companies. And there's like a set of heuristics that you have to meet in order to like get this get this badge or get this verification. And then I think the part that's hard for me is basically like what is in it for those businesses. Because like Kristen, as you said, I think, by and large, the meme at least is like these producers are just financially motivated. Why would I want to commit X% of my revenue to these individuals? It has to make sense over the medium term or the long term that you're building a more resilient business by committing to this, or you just deeply believe from like a values perspective that it's the right thing to do in the world. But I don't know about that side yet, Kristen.
I wonder, this is just one example. say. But, one of the things I've thought about, because, I have two little kids, a boy and a girl, and I have thought about this in terms of what are the things that they're going to be watching when they're older. Like I watch movies and TV shows, but what are they going to be seeing? Is it, I think the kind of transparency that you're talking about is one of the things that people are concerned about with the AI, that it could be a movie that's like, that is AI and it's not transparent. And when I think about that, I think about who's deciding the way, say, the women look in this movie, or how the men look, and what are the things that we're putting out there into the world that, what values and standards are we exposing young people to? And so I think from just say like a business side, there's a market, I think, among parents for wanting, like a certain value set or a certain reality for their kids to see. And the film industry has had problems with standards and reality long before AI came around, obviously. When you're talking about plastic surgery and all kinds of other things, it's not a realistic beauty standard. But, and then there's also TikTok and Instagram and all of those other things that are a problem. But I do think, like, there are markets for, I'm just thinking of like moms who are worried about what their daughters are absorbing, and would be inclined to go for maybe something that's, I don't know. You see what I'm saying?
Do you think we could build a reasonable trade-off, which is like, all right, you're going to get your intentional creativity badge or whatever. The commitment you have, it's another terrible name, but GiveWell was already taken, whatever. The commitment
no,
is
so bad.
Yeah, you get your little badge. We'll send you cool swag. But you have to take 5% of your total revenue and you have to reinvest that into basically like up-leveling and retraining for your existing employee base. You have to take 5% and you have to allocate it directly to your existing employee base, not the most, but those who are most affected by any sort of shifts we see, whether it's AI or what have you. But the reason it makes sense for you is because we have built at our fake company a distribution mechanism where you're actually going to get paid back 15% of your expected revenue over time. And so this is like an economically rational choice for you. It's like good for people in the world and it helps your employees. And if you like start with one sector, one company, it's like way more reasonable than trying to think about how to allocate, whatever, $50 trillion to everyone in the world.
Yeah. I mean, and when I think about I think the thing that's frightening to a lot of actors right now is that they don't know how to do anything else. And not just actors, but, other creative types where it's like, I've been, even for me, I'm like, I've been doing this for, this is my adult career. And I'm looking back thinking, gee, should I have just gone to law school or should I go to law school now? And,
well, now you're a podcaster, so you're good.
Yeah.
and you're starting a company.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
So, yeah, but to say I think the retraining, like people want to work, they want to do stuff. They don't just want to get cash in their pocket.
And I think that's the key. There can be a safety net, some structure, behind it, but it's the agility thing. The not to get back to 50,000 feet, but like we're evolving, in these increments of it's taking thousands of years, and tens of thousands of years and hundreds of thousands. So we're evolving on these very slow cycles, and our society has been evolving on faster cycles, but only, but they've still been pretty slow, an industrial revolution, and 150 years of tech revolution. So the pace is going to be crazy. And like just your anecdote of, I've been acting, what should I be doing next? In general, folks they've just had to make that decision once, right? You graduate, you spend 5 years bumping around, you get into a career and it holds for 40 years, and if you're really unlucky, you're one of those generations that's on the bubble. and between. But now every generation is going to be on the rebubble, and every 5 or 10 years is going to be the restructuring or regeneration. And you're going to have to do that 4 times. So I think, and why I like the broad, commitment to the net and the UBI and the things. There's an individual question of just how do we get out of that gold watch that I worked 40 years at a career, and like how do we get some agility back? You know, at every level. And that may be, I don't know if that's either, it may be more intractable, like it may be easier to do the broad social systems, because but I think that becomes really key. If you, and just to tie that last piece together, one nugget and that really attracted to me, what you're saying, if the organization that is laying off the 40,000, or the 4,000 customer service workers, is there an ethos to the organization that reskills those workers?
Mm.
Is the metric what percentage of your team stayed within your team, but was reskilled, in your team? That could be an ethos that might work, and that's the best. There's some economic argument for it because it's expensive to fire and expensive to hire, and all of that. But then maybe you have organizations with a real incentive to reskill. And I'm not sure that incentive exists right now to reskill. It's just kind of out with one skill set and in with the next. But agility and that rapid innovation at an individual org level would be half of the equation. And I think give well or intentional would be the other would be the other half.
Yeah. So I'll just make one observation. When we're talking about artists and people who are really committed to a certain form of creativity, it's reskilling, but it's also like allowing them to find equal meaning in something else, or equal, an equally creative application, for their life and their work. And that's what I really, I'm enjoying hearing, this sort of focus on. It's not just about, today I'm an actor, and tomorrow I have this skill that takes me really far away from whatever was inspiring me about that craft. So I'm just throwing it out there that like this to me is the power in this idea of like really sort of digging into the sourcing of what type of creativity does this company exist to put out into the world, and then how can we make sure if we're reskilling our workforce and putting them back into the same company, again, there's sort of this ethos that they're still getting to do similar work or work that called to them to begin with. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I worry a little bit about just saying, well, we'll give you a new set of skills without the same purpose that you had.
I think there's like, I think these things tend to be additive and like thematically similar. And so I think that there's like, okay, Steve, you're a writer. It might feel like your ability to succeed as a writer has been diminished in a world where there's, 7 million new books every year and 90% of them are written by large language models. But is there something you can do on top of that where there's a different framework for how you're able to leverage that technology and put something brilliant out into the world? Or like Kristen, you're an actress in a given movie. In 10 years, are you producing 5 movies end to end, soup to nuts yourself? And it's pretty related to like where you find value and what you love to do, but you're able to be even more effective and have even larger of an impact. And how would we provide folks with a path to do even more in a given space or genre that they've fallen in love with?
Yeah, it's the even more that I would be willing to bet on. And as a creative myself, like as a person who writes, as you said, I'm also willing to bet on human writers. And if 5 years from now, human writing is not as good or not as effective, then we lost. Like,
yeah.
So I don't know. I think I don't know that I would hang on to it if it was very clear to me, for instance, if we created this badging situation and there's this company that's really committed to the human creative element, and 10 years from now, the movies are clearly they're not landing as well. They're not as good. They're just lacking something. I don't know. Would we keep going, or would we just say like we have to evolve in a different way?
Well, I think that gets to now we're going to go super crazy. I think that gets to like the fundamental question at the heart of this whole AI argument is like, is there something essential about a human doing something? Or can we basically just replicate that with like 7 billion different parameters and just running a whole bunch of simulations? Like, can we envision getting to a world where like nobody cares if the sculpture in their house or the book that they're reading or the piece of content that they're watching was made by a human on a first order basis versus, generated by some artificial intelligence model? And like, who knows? My current perspective is like, the vast majority of the world sees value in like the human participation in creating things, and that you lose. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Sorry. No, and I was just going to say, it was interesting that you said like a book, that's, I guess I would push back and say, if it's not written by a human being, like I have a hard time calling that a book or like a piece of art. Like if it's not made by a human being, like, and maybe you can't tell the difference, or a person just walking by can't tell the difference. But I just, and maybe this is like, maybe I'm just a dinosaur, but I think like there has to be, and this is, I think what you were saying as well, though, but like there has to be a difference between something that's created by an actual human being. And I do think that there, like you were saying, there is a value in that most people recognize. I guess where it gets complicated is if you're watching something or reading something and you don't know, when it's so high level that you can't tell the difference. But
I think that's the ultimate. I think that's the ultimate like AGI, like generalized intelligence question is like, are the machines going to get good enough to be basically the same or better than humans at basically everything? And like when you're in that world and you can't tell and you have no idea if this movie or this painting or this sculpture or how this narrative was crafted by a human or not a human, like what is that gonna be like?
Yeah. Well, I asked ChatGPT this week, thinking about our conversation today, I asked ChatGPT, what does AI mean for actors? And it said that while it can, it was a lot of stuff. And then basically it said, but, human beings, there's always a place for human beings and people will always be drawn to human beings. And I was like, I don't know if I feel better or worse after reading that. It was a pretty good answer.
It could be setting you up. I just thought of what would make this podcast so amazing if I was actually not real. And then I just revealed it. Like that would be amazing.
Are you just on ChatGPT, like asking all the questions right now as like a pass through, Steve?
I'm just saying, I wish I would have thought of that sooner. That would have been amazing. Not sure how I would have pulled it off. But I do want to sort of turn us to our last piece here, because I do feel that when we listen back to this, we did address a problem. We did come up with a pretty interesting idea. The badging and putting values forward, and the bet that we'd be taking on human creativity. But I just wanted to close by asking each of you to just reflect on something that you learned, or an inspiration that you're going to take from this conversation forward. So something you'll take out into the world because of this conversation. Whoever wants to start can start. Sorry, my earbud just fell out. So whoever wants to start can start.
I think I'm happy to start. Well, I think first of all, we should have done this for like 5 hours. Should get this group together every week. Let's continue the podcast. This was really fun. Thanks, Steve. But for me, the thing that like I think I'm gonna keep on reflecting on is one of the points Anthony was making just around agility and kind of the exponential growth in the pace of innovation and how that flows through. And looking back several generations, folks generally had 1 or 2 careers. Is that going to be totally different for me or for my kids? And what does that mean? Does that like fundamentally question this concept of like going to college and picking a major, and that's now what you're going to do for the next 50 years? Are we going to have like 5 different chunks And where is that? Where is that more true versus less true? I think thinking through this, I think it's really interesting where like a lot of the things that we're talking about that are going to fundamentally change is not necessarily ubiquitous. Like I'm trying to imagine the AI revolution meaningfully impacting like roofers and the job that roofers are doing. I don't see that on like the immediate term roadmap. And so this concept of agility and the pace of change, you kind of have to step back and look at the past 100 years, the next 50 years to think through that. And I'm just stuck in my day to day, hour to hour, every day. So that was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of was having a similar thought. Just this idea of agility and rethinking the way that your life is supposed to look, and that rather than seeing it as something that's kind of terrifying, we can all and maybe this will be sort of a transitional time. But when I think about people who I know who've changed careers, and that there's usually some like amount of shame or embarrassment around that, or just like deep discomfort, that maybe this is an opportunity for people like the next generation to really have more variation in their life and in the different chapters of their life, and get to do and try new things without the sort of baggage of feeling like they've failed at something, or that something has failed them. That it's just a part of how we exist.
So Kristen, build on that. My 1, 2, 3 was one. It's interesting to see. I think there's a universal obsession and angst around this technology and this topic. If I can extrapolate out from the 4 or 5, of us out. On your point about the many careers, I found myself wondering for the first time, is it a recent accident that folks have been deriving so much, trying to derive so much meaning from work, and work needing to have meaning? Is that just a recent accident of spending, 40, 50, 60 hours or most of our lives, doing one thing and trying to demand, So, the meaning it's just a fleeting thought. It's not a conclusion. The meaning may end up coming from different places, or if you're agilely moving through different careers, it may not be attached to any one of those, careers. That was just a fleeting thought that occurred for the first time. Is it an accident that for our whole lives, and maybe a couple generations before it, that work is and meaning are, expected to be just tightly tied. Last thing that I reflected on, it's we're really not clear what is human anymore. When you talk about the art, like the art is behind Owen on the wall, and is the human part of it if it's artificially created, is the human part of it my human reaction to the AI creation, or is the human part of it, the artist into the art, or is the human part of it the artist connecting to me through, what's on the wall? We're in a little bit of a blender on that. Is a book, if it's not written by a human? So interesting times for sure.
Okay, and I do feel that we could have gone on and on with this conversation, but as I said before, it was a bit of a bounded experiment, and I'm actually really pleased that at the core of it, we were actually also talking about ethics and morality, and we didn't say those words, but I guess I would have expected that, given that you've come from a school like back when you came from our school where that was something that we actually cared about. So I want to thank you for your time today and for just engaging in this process. I realize it was a little bit risky to kind of go down this road, but thanks for going down the road with me. And Anthony, Owen, Kristen, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.